Hello everyone, welcome back. Let's simplify tech one concept at a time. Today, let's understand the layered architecture of Spring Boot project, the controller, service, and repository layers. What each one does and why we separate them. So let's dive in. So let's just understand why Spring Boot project has controller, service, and repository structure. It is called layer architecture. Imagine you are building your project, something called Clarity Connect or anything. User, book advice. Suppose it's a freelancing platform where you can book an advisor. So let's just go through the process. First, user will log in, then user will book advice, pay, and store in database. Let's just see what will happen internally. You go to the restaurant. First, you are customer who request for the food. Client. So let's just understand with the real world example. Client who is first front end. Then waiter who takes order, which is called controller. So client is a outsider plant part and controller is the part who interact with clients. Then chef who is main person of the restaurant who actually cooks food. That's why service layer is work as a shape in the layered architecture of Spring Boot. Storeroom, raw materials, database. Store manager, who manages material, which handles in repository. So you can see client front end who sends the request. The request is taken by the controller layer. Then the logic is written in the service layer. Then there is a database where all the data gets stored and all the data and store manager, which logic is stored in the repository. So let's just understand first what is controller. Controller user से request लेता है. So controller is the layer who takes the request from the user. Suppose there is a thing called post book session. सो कंट्रोलर का काम क्या होगा यहाँ पे? रिक्वेस्ट लेना, सर्विस को कॉल करना, रिस्पॉन्स रिटर्न करना. So it just takes the request from the front end client who takes request. Then it also has to send this request to further to the service layer. So there is a thing called REST controller, request mapping, booking, public class booking controller, auto wired, private booking service. So it's just the code you can go through this. In this way, we can write the logic. In this way, we can write the business logic of the controller. Then there is a second layer called service layer. So controller is the first layer who takes the request from the front end. Then it calls to the service layer and also response return कर देता है. Service is the brain of the application. You can remember it like the service is the chef of the restaurant. Like business logic लिखते हैं, conditions लगाते हैं, validations करते हैं, payment check, data process. Example, at the red service, public class booking service. You can go through this code, like how to write the code in a service layer. So you can remember it as a controller who is a waiter who takes order. Like controller takes the request from the front end, it process that request and it further sends this request to the service layer. Service, you can remember it as a chef of the restaurant. Like in service is also the brain of the application where the proper business logic is written. Service layer is very important because clean code, easy testing, logic separated from controller, reusability. Next layer is what is repository. रिपोजिटरी डायरेक्टली डेटाबेस से बात करता है. लाइक स्प्रिंग बूट में हम यूजुअली यूज करते हैं जेपीए रिपोजिटरी. रिपोजिटरी पब्लिक इंटरफेरेंस बुकिंग रिपोजिटरी extend you can go through this code. So instead of writing the complex queries, you can directly write the code like save, find by id, delete, find all. Using these keywords only you can get the access from the database, so automatically data mil jata hai. So now the main cursor is how they communicate between them. Now you know controller, service, repository. It is called the layered architecture. Controller who takes the like request from the front end client, then it further proceed to the service layer. Service layer is also called brain of the layered architecture because the actual logic for the process is written in the service, and repository is the place who directly connect to the database, who directly sends query to retrieve the data from the database. How they communicate? So first of all, front end sends the request to the controller. Controller takes the request from the front end, further sends to the service, then repository, and repository then communicate with the database. Now again database uh, request gets processed, data get retrieved from the database, then it again sends to the repository, service, controller, and again at the end it gives response to the front end. Means controller calls service, service calls repository, repository talks to the database directly. Communication happens through method calls. So you know what is DTO? There is a concept called data transfer object, which is specifically used in Spring Boot, used to transfer data between layers. So, as we know, these layers communicate between each other, but how the actual data get transferred between layers? So, data is actually transferred using DTO, data transfer object. So, why not use entity directly? So, you must be in thinking like, why can't we use entity directly? So, first of all, security issue, पासवर्ड लीक हो सकता है, unnecessary field expose, tight coupling. So you can go through this code like at the rate entity, public class user DTO. So you must have been thinking how to write the DTO logic. DTO generally includes fields, getter, setter. You can see data is transferred using data transfer object, but DTO में business logic नहीं लिखते हैं. So how Spring Boot auto configuration works? So you know the most important feature of Spring Boot is auto configuration. So first of all, there is a Spring Boot application. This is the combination of configuration, enable auto configuration, component scan. So what at the rate component scan does? Spring automatically scan करता है different layers of the architecture, controller, service, repository, component और उनका object बना देता है. So you can see how it works. So in short, you can understand layered architecture, controller who takes the request, service layer who writes the logic, repository who directly communicates with the database, and the DTO डेटा सेफली ट्रांसफर करने की रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी डीटीओ की होती है, डेटा ट्रांसफर ऑब्जेक्ट्स. सो This is the layered architecture. Thank you. Like, share, subscribe.